Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. Episode 45, Melville the Bushranger. Francis Melville was born probably Francis MacNeiss McNeil McCallum in Paisley, Scotland in 1821 or 1822. His father was said to be a clergyman of the Presbyterian Church. Some believed he came from aristocratic blood, but proof is either lacking or the evidence weak. He reputedly studied at the Edinburgh College. In the Perth Court of Judiciary on the 3rd of October 1836, he admitted to having served 22 months all up in jail for thievery prior, starting his criminal career at the age of 12. At 15, he was sentenced to 7 years transportation for housebreaking. There is another account, however, that he stole potatoes or a potato pie from a countryman's cart. Even then, he was using aliases such as Edward Melville or Mulville. As Edward Melville, he served 20 months in English jails and was then sent to Hobart Town on the Minerva. He arrived on the 29th of September 1838 and in the October was placed at Port Arthur in the Point Pier Institution for Juvenile Convicts. Point Pier was a landmark in British history as the first juvenile prison. Prior to this, all convicts, regardless of their age, were kept together and in the same conditions. Given that under British law, a child as young as 8 was able to be tried as an adult, this resulted in many children being brutalised alongside hardened criminals and adult offenders. Point Pier provided an environment for wayward youths to learn skills and a trade, with emphasis on trades such as shoemaking, timberwork, masonry, gardening and construction. McCallum served 18 months at Point Pier, whereupon he was assigned to the timber yards in Hobart. On the 20th of September 1840, McCallum was absent from work and displayed insolence towards his guards and received 20 lashes. In 1839 to 1848, he came before the police magistrate 25 times. On the 22nd of February 1841, he got an additional 2 years onto his sentence. In July 1841, he first took to the bush, taking 2 older prisoners with him, and he lasted out there for 5 to 6 weeks. They committed burglary and were quickly apprehended and charged for bushranging. They were initially sentenced to death, but McCallum was respited and the sentence amended to transportation for life. He was sent to Port Arthur for 5 years and received 36 lashes. He was recommended in 1846 for a year's probation, but he absconded from his service on a farm near Launceston and lived with the Aboriginals for a year. After recapture, he was given 9 months hard labour in chains. He absconded again in January 1850 and then in August 1850. By the end of 1851, McCallum had finally made good his escape by stowing away on the brig Melbourne. He was now a scarred and bitter 27-year-old, making his way to the mainland and assuming the name Edward Melville. Once he reached Victoria in about October 1851, he called himself Captain Francis Melville and posed as a gentleman. He tried mining in the goldfields. However, by the December, he had turned bushranger. He claimed leadership of the Mount Macedon gang that waylaid travellers in the Black Forest. Captain Melville gained a reputation as a man not to be trifled with. Late in 1852, the gang spent a drunken week in Deniliquin, southern New South Wales, with no one to curb their debauchery after the local chief constable went on, in inverted commas, urgent business to Moama after Melville threatened to cut his ears off. An old inebriate, old Jack, joined in the drinking to the point of becoming belligerent. One of the gang doused him in turpentine, thinking it was water. Another, not knowing this, poked a candle in his face and the old man was soon alight. It's said that Melville, when found dead in his cell in the Melbourne jail, had scrawled on the wall,
"I am Captain Melville, but I did not murder old Jack." And there was an article that outlined the incident with old Jack in a lot more detail. It says, "There can have been few more awe-inspiring sights in our history than Chief Constable Squires of Deniliquin speaking about bushrangers. His mighty fists would clench, his mighty chest would heave, and his mighty feet stamp the sawdust all round the barroom floor. How he hated highwaymen. Strangely enough, until the end of 1851, he'd never managed to catch one. But my word, when he did, he was going to deal out corporal punishment on a tremendous scale. Even though they took some frightful car bashings, the good people of Deniliquin were happy to have Chief Constable Squires in their midst. He was at least insurance against raiders. That was the philosophical way the local postmaster viewed the fact that Squires was quartered in his premises. If anyone is safe from the bandit, it's me, and of course my family, the postmaster would console himself. One night, late in 1851, Chief Constable Squires decided that his day's work was done. He got into his nightshirt and climbed into bed in the postmaster's back room to sleep and perchance to dream about catching wicked men. He'd hardly settled down when he heard a thunderous knocking on the front door of the post office. Idly he listened to the postmaster sourly answering the summons. Then a cold, hard voice rang out. "I'm Captain Melville. Where's that long-bodied, arse-eared Bobby? I'm told he's staying here, and by the Lord I'll roast him if I catch him." Chief Constable Squires immediately was alert and interested. He was aware that Captain Melville was chief contender for the title of bushranging champion. A plan of action was needed quickly. Chief Constable Squires was equal to the occasion. He grabbed his police cap from the chair beside the bed, clad in that and his nightie, sped bare-toed to the back door. Once through the door, he packed on full speed and quite a time later found himself somewhere in the scrub on the Edward River. And where was Captain Melville? Here was Chief Constable Squires waiting, ready and willing to fight any man who could find him in the darkness behind the bushes. Melville only had to come forth like a man and discover him. Melville threw back his coat, revealing a belt stuffed with pistols. After him came 5 of his followers. The postmaster was terrified. He was not particularly worried that the bushrangers would hurt him, but he knew that Chief Constable Squires was out in the back room and that he would fight to the death against these ruffians. Bullets would fly everywhere and his family would be endangered. "We'll search the place," shouted Melville, marching from room to room. He came to the constable's room. Melville thrust a hand between the covers and it felt warm. "He's only just gone," he roared, and rushed for the back door. However, he had been outwitted. Given a few seconds' start, Squires had steeplechased far into the night. Melville fired some wicked oaths and pistol balls into the darkness and returned inside. To assuage the disappointment of his men and himself, he decided to hold a party. Large quantities of rum were demanded and obtained, and the show was on. The affair lasted for a week. Chief Constable Squires waited for some time in the scrub for Melville to come out to do combat, and then padded off to the distant Maiden's Punt, now known as Moama, where there was a strong police post. Captain Melville insisted on able-bodied men in Deniliquin attending the post office to have a noggin with him. One cannot feel disgust at the number of people who did not have to be dragged to this ordeal at pistol point. It was lucky for Melville that Chief Constable Squires was not present, for the bushrangers spent day after day saying the rudest things about the forces of law and order. And worse, normally good citizens raised their pannikins of rum to drink toasts, damning the eyes of the constabulary. One of the locals finally broke up the party. He was an ancient character who could not hold his liquor, and he reached the stage where he wanted to fight everyone. Somehow he got himself covered in turpentine and then came in contact with a candle. He ran all the way to the Edward River to extinguish himself. The incident served to sober up the visitors. They decided they'd better be moving on. First they rested for 24 hours to regain their sense of balance and then set forth. After fording the Edward River, they came to the Wanderer Hotel, kept by Mr. Button. They felt in need of refreshments and entered. The proprietor was far from pleased. He said so and was tied up. When he became sensible again, he was released and forced to join the festivities. In his youth, Mr. Button had been a Devonshire wrestler of some capacity, and whenever he happened to get a bit tiddly, the urge to do a bit of cross-buttock throwing always came crowding in upon him. He took up position in the centre of his bar and offered to wrestle all corners. The biggest, toughest, ugliest member of the Melville gang came forward to mark and accept the challenge. Space was cleared, and all present settled down to enjoy a little sporting entertainment. Now, one of the finer points of Devonshire wrestling is that you can boot your opponent in the shins as hard as you like and as often. Mr. Button was fully aware of this, but his bushranger opponent was not. The men, circled cautiously, came in close, and Mr. Button let out with his heavy clodhoppers. The bushranger howled in pain and fell writhing on the floor. Mr. Button was jubilant, but his opponent considered he had been the victim of the most unsportsmanlike action. The latter felt he had no other alternative but to blow Mr. Button's nut off. He was drawing his pistol to do so when a horse drew up outside. Immediately the wrestle was forgotten. A stranger, and a regular toff at that, walked to the bar. If ever a traveller looked lined with cash, this one did. Seemingly there was a deal of finesse in bushranging in those days. Captain Melville and his boys could have knocked the fellow over and tested his pockets without any trouble, but they were too good-mannered. They gathered around the stranger as he breasted the bar. "Have a drink with me, gentlemen," requested the man. The boys didn't mind if they did. They had a few more too. The stranger sensed that something was wrong. He had a considerable amount of money on his person. Unfortunately, his horse was tied, so he had no chance of an immediate escape. His fears were confirmed when Mr. Button managed to get a quiet word in his ear, but the stranger didn't lose his nerve like some other people one could mention. He sat down calmly to an evening meal, sure as it was, and then said he would like to go to bed early. The bandits watched as he marched off to his bedroom. They had agreed amongst themselves to do the job in the nicest way, wait until the fellow was sound asleep, and then pick his pocket. The stranger sat on the bed with the light on. He heard heavy feet trying to tiptoe up to his door. After a while he switched off the light and faked some gentle snoring. The heavy feet retired to report that the victims soon would be ready for plucking. But oh no, out through the window crawled the man. He got his horse mounted and laid on the whip. Melville and his men rushed outside, but were too late. This incident ended the festivities at the Wanderer Hotel. Captain Melville instructed his boys to collect all the refreshments they thought necessary and led them away into the wilderness. What has Chief Constable Squires been doing all this time? Let me tell you what, he has been mighty active. When he got to the police station at Maiden's Punt, he told a blood-tingling story of how he'd outwitted Melville. He had challenged the whole gang, mentally, to come out one at a time or even in pairs to fight man to man or men to man, but of course the cads had lacked the courage to respond. Squires led a police party back to Deniliquin. He arrived long after Melville had departed. People rushed to him, jabbering excitedly that in his absence the Melville gang had raided the place and kicked it round for a week. Chief Constable Squires suddenly realised that no one seemed aware that he had nipped out the back door of the post office. Obviously the postmaster hadn't pimped, and the town had concluded the officer had been away on duty. "What?" roared Squires. "Do you mean to tell me that Melville and his gang came in my absence?" His mighty fist clenched, his mighty chest heaved, and he fairly danced with frustrated rage. "I've missed the chance of a lifetime," he cried to heaven. "If I could have met the ruffians hand to hand, I would have earned high promotion." Everyone sympathised with the distressed policeman. "Where did they go?" Squires wanted to know. Someone said that they understood the bandits had gone to the Wanderer Hotel. "Wish me luck," he cried, leapt into the saddle and dug in the spurs. Spray flew high as Chief Constable Squires galloped over the Edward River ford. He reined in near the hotel and had a good look around, and there were no visitors. In went the spurs again. Squires pulled up at the inn door in a flurry of dust and rushed at the door, drawing a pistol as he moved. "Come out, you dogs, and fight," he snarled. Mr. Button, the ex-Devonshire wrestler, got a terrible shock. Melville had left his establishment so long before that he'd forgotten all about the bushrangers, and for a moment he thought they'd come back to make more trouble. Gently he explained to Squires that his quarry had long gone. The anguish of the Chief Constable was terrible to witness, how those fists clenched and how that chest heaved. He turned on such an act that Mr. Button became very sorry for him. "Maybe," he soothed, "you might have got some luck if you scoured the district for them." Chief Constable Squires had not been prepared for a blow of that nature, but he quickly gathered his composure and explained in detail how such a move would be futile. The key to his argument was that the bushrangers would have got wind of his return and would have probably reached Tasmania by that time. Squires went back over the Edward River into Deniliquin, all ready to collect some more sympathy. He found that people were regarding him with hostile glints in their eyes. Soon he discovered the reason. The postmaster had broken his silence, and the story of the nightgown flit was known to one and all. The citizens didn't pause to consider the tactics behind the manoeuvre. They condemned the chief constable without a hearing, and they made the going so tough for the poor chap that he got himself transferred somewhere else. And today there is a sign on a big gum tree. On this spot, old Jack is buried, burnt to death by bushrangers, 1852. In 1852, Melville held up Alfred Joyce at Norwood Station and watched for travellers along the western track from the central goldfields across the Wimmera, and there are claims that police almost trapped him near Mount Araples, where he had a cave. During shearing at Wonwanda, he ordered and paid in a lordly fashion for having his lost horse found and breakfast prepared. Charles Carter and his sons, travelling with drays on Fiery Creek Plains, encountered Melville and two companions. The bushrangers found the Carters' weapons too risky and rode off. They later held up teamsters at Rokewood. In early November, Melville trailed a digger to Maryvale Station, where he robbed him and captured the manager. Early in December, Melville moved further into the Western District. He rode to the station of a squatter named McKinnon. As the sun was setting and let himself in, he summoned the maid and then asked to see the man of the house. When McKinnon responded, Melville stated that he had heard the man's daughters were accomplished musicians and requested an impromptu performance. McKinnon protested that the girls were dressed up and ready to go to a ball that evening and refused to summon them. Melville levelled his pistol at McKinnon, who quickly reconsidered his answer. The girls were brought down and compelled to play piano, with Melville singing along. However, word had reached the local constabulary, and by dawn a party of troopers was on the doorstep. Melville, quick as a hare, made a hasty exit via a window. On the 18th of December 1852, Melville, in company with a mate named William Roberts, stuck up Acheson's sheep station near Wardyallock. After rounding up the 16 staff and imprisoning them in a barn, Melville bailed up Wilson, the overseer. After Melville cut a length of rope into pieces, they proceeded to call the men out one by one and tied them up to the fences outside. When Wilson asked what they wanted, Melville replied, "Golden horses, and we're going to get them." With the men secured, the bushrangers went to the homestead. Melville told the women not to fear them, as they would not interfere with women more than necessary. He then ordered them into a room and instructed them to prepare food, which was taken with 2 bottles of brandy to the men. Melville and Roberts indulged in a meal, then ransacked the house, taking any valuables they could grab. After this, the pair stole 2 of Acheson's finest horses and gear, and then as they were leaving, they informed the prisoners that Mrs. Acheson would be down to untie them once the coast was clear. The next day at Bruce's Creek, the bushrangers robbed Thomas Warren and William Madden of £37, but gave them £10 for travelling expenses. On the 24th, they held up 2 bush workers at Finesford. In Geelong, they put up at Christie's Inn in Corio Street, dined and visited a brothel. Melville's boasting and the £100 reward for his capture induced a woman to warn the police. Alerted, Melville smashed a window and climbed into the street. He knocked down a policeman, ran towards Ballarat Road, but was met by Henry Guy on a fine horse. As he tossed Guy from the saddle, the horse escaped. Guy grappled with him until 2 policemen arrived. Roberts had already been arrested, and the bushrangers spent Christmas in South Geelong Jail, Melville under the alias of Thomas Smith. Captain Melville's partner in crime was Robert Duncan. William Robert Roberts, alias Robert Duncan, was born in 1821 in Manchester, England. He was sent out on the ship Tenasserim in 1844, and he had been tried at the Bombay General Court Martial on the 29th of April 1844 and got 7 years transportation for deserting the 17th Regiment and being absent 8 days on his first offence. He'd served 3 years all up in the 17th Regiment, and at the time of his transportation, he was listed as a soldier, groom, gent servant. He arrived at Van Diemen's Land on the 29th of December 1844, aged 23. He was at Morven, Tasmania in August 1848, and he got his ticket of leave on the 5th of December 1848. He was listed as Roman Catholic. He could read and write. His mother was Charlotte and sister Annie. He got permission to marry Priscilla Lee, another convict who'd come out on the Woodbridge, and it was approved on the 18th of April 1849. Priscilla was married with 1 child and 28 at the time of her conviction. She stated that she hadn't seen her husband John for 8 years. So she married Robert Duncan, 29, a bachelor, and Priscilla was 34, a widow, at the manse Evandale in the Morven district on the 9th of April 1849, according to the rites of the Church of England. On the 19th of July 1849, they had a daughter, Mary. Robert was listed as a constable at Cleggan in the Morven district, and baby Mary only survived 1 hour. On the 28th of June 1850, they had a daughter, Anne. Then they had a son, Robert Duncan, on the 5th of June 1852 in Launceston. Robert was listed as a butcher at the time of his son's birth. And on the 19th of August 1852, Robert left Launceston and sailed to Melbourne, and it seems leaving his wife and children behind. On his jail records from the December 1852 Geelong incident with Melville, he listed his trade as a bootmaker, 5'8", and said he was born in 1816. He had many tattoos. He was sentenced to 12, 10 and 10 years, with 10 years remitted to be served at Ballarat Jail. He received a ticket of leave on the 19th of January 1864 in Ballarat, but by the 8th of September of that year he failed to report and was at large. His wife Priscilla died aged 35 in January 1853 at Launceston of inflammation. Their son Robert died at 5 months old of influenza, 5 days after her, and Jane Holder, a friend, was the informant on the certificate. Captain Foster Fynes committed both of them on the 3rd of January 1853 for trial before Judge Redmond Barry, set for the 3rd of February, on charges of highway robbery, horse stealing, assault and robbery. And as a result, Melville was sentenced to a total of 32 years hard labour, the same as what Robert Duncan had. Melville was imprisoned in the Hulk President, and he attempted on the 4th of June to bite off a sergeant's nose. He was beaten by the warders, Neddies, and given 20 days solitary confinement. On the 20th of January 1854, he had another month's solitary confinement for inciting the prisoners to mutiny. In mid-year, John Price had him transferred to the Hulk Success and allowed him to work ashore in the Point Gellibrand quarry. Melville behaved and was allowed to spend 3 days a week allegedly translating the Bible into the Aboriginal language. In fact, he was planning with a former ship's captain, Billy Stevens, to seize a cutter and sail to Gippsland. Their 8 accomplices included Harry Power. They captured the towboat, took Constable Owens as hostage, and rowed down Hobson's Bay with Melville shouting, "Goodbye at last" to Victoria. As the water police and guard boats closed in, Stevens smashed Owens' skull and leapt into the sea to his death. When captured, Melville is credited with saying, "I would sooner die than suffer what I've been subjected to in these hulks in the past 4 years." A citizens' committee engaged Dr. Mackay to plead the convict's case, but Melville conducted his own defence before Judge Robert Molesworth on the 19th of November 1855. He was charged as Thomas Smith, alias Frank McCallum, alias Captain Melville, and in cross-examination upset police claims that he'd murdered Owens, but Molesworth ruled that they were all guilty when a man died while attempting to escape custody. Melville argued that he had been charged as Thomas Smith, a name he'd never used, that he was sentenced to work on the roads, not imprisoned in a hulk, that a warrant for his custody in a hulk did not extend to a quarry, and that treatment in the hulks was degrading. He and 2 other conspirators were sentenced to death, but the case was referred to the full court. For trials, the Citizens Committee briefed R.D. Ireland, who called 3 condemned men as witnesses and secured acquittal of the 6. On the 4th of December, the full court concluded that the Crown had not produced a warrant for Melville's transfer from the President to the Success and thus failed to prove that he had tried to escape from legal custody. The death sentence was respited. The Melville case made legal history. In 1964, Sir John Barry asserted that it was good law. Melville was transferred to the Old Melbourne Jail, where he had outbursts of fury and warders were warned not to excite him. In late July 1857, he attacked Mr. Wintle, the governor of the jail, with a sharp spoon, causing a deep cut behind Mr. Wintle's ear. At dawn on the 12th of August 1857, a warder found him strangled by a large red-spotted blue scarf, 2 yards in length, twisted very tightly around his neck, the first turn being made as a slip knot. The consensus is that he committed suicide, although there is a theory that he was murdered. And there's some articles outlining his death. On a wash wall in the cell, this was written, "I am to suffer nothing. My name is not T. Smith, but McCallum. I intend to defeat their purpose and to die in my bed with a smile by my own hand, and thus by my keenies to defeat their most secret intentions. And these steps were taken to give me an opportunity of doing so, as it is in my power to prove that I am not the man I am taken for. F. Melville. On the 21st of October 1903, there was an article titled Captain Melville's Hoard. An announcement that there is shortly to be published in London a book of reminiscences by an old Victorian gold digger who had the late Peter Laylaw as a fellow passenger on the voyage out, and who subsequently made the acquaintance of the notorious bushranger Captain Melville, has inspired Mr. J.F. Hogan to publish some interesting information about the latter desperado. In the 50s, he was the terror of the country between Geelong and Ballarat and plundered many a lucky digger. He was eventually captured in Geelong, but his hidden treasure, amounting it to be believed to be many thousands of pounds, has never been discovered, and he himself boasted in Melbourne jail it was so securely planted that nobody would find it for 100 years. Mount Anaki, 20 miles northwest of Geelong, and Mount Doran, further north, two of his lookouts and hiding places, have been repeatedly searched in vain. The enterprising treasure hunters of Geelong and Ballarat ought to have another try. There's nothing like perseverance. Melville created a legend of cultured gentlemen, of good address and scholarship turned highwaymen, considerate to those whom they robbed, courteous and charming to women, and a 19th century Robin Hood. Yet he was a swaggerer, courageous behind a brace of pistols, and a skillful, confident man, destroyed by the penal system and his unbalanced character.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.